background on how the fruit becomes. And this usually happens around March, May, when we start seeing the buds on the saguaros. And I think there are still some that are noticeable even right now. Usually we do have those late bloomers. And so what happens is we usually see them budding out like this. And then they'll move on to the next stage where they'll actually flower. They'll open up and they'll have these milky white blooms where, you know, you have a little pollinator there. And the flowers are opened up for 24 hours and then they'll close up. And when they close up, this is what they look like. They look kind of dry. And they eventually move on to this stage. So now this is still the bloom attached to it, but it's just really, really dry. And then the second part is where the fruit develops. And the heat, the summer, you know, 3-digit temperatures are important to this heat being ready. Because what it does is it actually caramelizes that fruit, and that's what makes it burst open from all that heat. And once it opens up, the birds love it. And traditionally, as tribal people, we've always known to allow the animals to take the fruit first because it's a part of that process. It's a part of that seed dispersal of the next generation. And a lot of animals and birds are heavily reliant on that. So that's pretty much how these fruits become to be, and it is during the months of June and July that this harvest does take place here. The picking, way back then, culturally, it was mainly meant for ceremonial purposes. You get up before the sun, you go out and you harvest, and you make ceremonial wine, which was relied on. It was believed that through song and dance, that is what was going to bring the monsoon rains. And when the monsoon rains came, that is what was going to be watering the crops. So that was the belief then. And there are still some of them that do participate in the ceremonial part of this, but now it is more where families or friends, even non-natives, come to these camps to harvest the fruit and make it into a jam or a wine, or not a wine, but a syrup. And I'll show you a little bit more of that later in the presentation. But the main purpose back then was for ceremonial purposes. And when you're going out there and harvesting your fruit, you usually use some old saguaro, some dead saguaro ribs that were laid around. And these are really helpful because, you know, these saguaros are very soft. But this, it's very light, so you can go pretty high to catch, bring down some of the fruit. And normally when you are harvesting, you don't want to take all the fruit, of course. You just want to take a few. And once that happens, you just put it in your bucket and move on to the next saguaro. And families usually have saguaro camps. So traditionally, families would actually travel during the summertime to go to their camps, and that's what they would do during the summertime before they went back to home. And they would have a winter home and a summer home. That's how the autumn traveled back then. Now, this was a time for folks to come together as Humachkam, being together. The men would always have their games, and then the women would have their games, and they would, it was a time of family, a time of gathering. And these are some photos that I was able to find of the harvesting taking place. And a song of ceremonial dance, calling in the rains. And growing up as a kid, they had what they call a Baidach camp. So it was a fun thing for kids to go and do this for maybe a week or something, or a weekend. Then this photo here is pretty much how the harvesting would take place. This woman here, Tanisha, her her mother and her great-grandma have been in this park harvesting long before the park was here. And her mother is now elder, and she is now the next to carry on that tradition because they're still doing it here in the park. And you can tell which ones are ready. So the ones that are still pretty green, those definitely aren't ready. But the ones that have a little red tip, you know for sure that those are the ones that are good to go. And when you knock them down, you have your bucket to collect. And this is what it would look like when you do open it up. Some are pretty firm like this. Others are kind of mushy or very juicy. And then the ones that have been sitting open in the sun for some time, they get kind of darker and drier, but those are the much sweeter ones. They call those June, so they're kind of like candy. And you can collect the hard June ones and put it in a jar and have it for a few months. And so this here is what we call a traditional calendar. Now, the autumn relied a lot on the seasons to tell us what time of year it was. And traditionally, we celebrate our new year during the summertime. Because again, it's a time of renewal. It's a time of renewal not only for us spiritually, but for the land. Because all that rain that we get, it replenishes the land and brings life back to us and the animals. And it's amazing if you haven't experienced a monsoon here, it's just really cool to see so many people coming outdoors, and you can tell that the plants are happy. You can tell that the animals are happy. So it's just a really good time. But this is the time that we celebrate our new year, is during the summertime. So this is definitely something that has survived through the times, generation after generation, and that it's still valued today by Native people and non-Native people. And the camp that is in the park, the family that still does it, they get a lot of non-Natives who have become really good friends with them, and they bring their families, or they come every summer to participate in this harvest as well. And I just think it's really cool because you meet so many people from so many different walks of life, and it's just amazing what it's grown into today. Oh, another cool thing is that with these pods, when they're completely closed, and you knock it down, and here's that dried bloom. When you break it off right here, it actually is pretty sharp, and you can use that as a knife to cut it open. It's pretty cool when you're able to do that. So this is a part of the processing of the fruit. So what happens is that you have your bucket, and you come back, and you mix water with the bucket, because there are some that are still kind of hard, so you want them like the water really helps it to soften up. And then you place it in a strainer, and that's what they're doing here, a few times, and then you're straining the liquid out of from the pulp, and then the pulp is what gets left out to dry. And this is what will be used for the jam. And the juice that's left gets put on the fire, and this gets made into the syrup. And through time, other folks have experimented with this, and even with the seeds, it's used for chicken feed or in place of poppy seeds. It's also used as a thickener, which in the video that we'll watch next, you'll kind of see how they grind up the seeds and use it. But I've used it on salads, also the syrup, it's really good. Some folks use it on some ice cream, a garnish, things like that. So this is a part of the process, so we'll watch this short video that will give you a better idea of how that goes.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ Harvesting Baitach is an important part of the autumn himatak. The harvest helps bring the summer rains and marks the beginning of the autumn new year. Once you have finished picking baitach, it is time to cook it into sito, or syrup. Begin by putting the fresh fruit in a pot over a mesquite fire. If you collected a lot of June or dried fruit, you may need to add a small amount of water. Bring the fruit to a boil and cook it until all the clumps are fully dissolved, usually about 30 to 45 minutes. Next, strain the baitach. Use a very fine strainer or cheesecloth to remove all of the pulp and seeds, leaving just the juice in your cooking pot. Once fully strained, place the juice back on the fire and begin cooking the sito, or syrup. It is important to keep stirring the sito to make sure it doesn't burn on the bottom of the pot. Because the sito is used for the Jochkita, or rain ceremony, many people sing traditional songs, pray, and seek blessing while the syrup is cooking. As the sito cooks, it will reduce in volume and become thicker. Once it covers a spoon and is thickened, it is done. The hot finished sito can be placed in canning jars and saved up to 2 years, but most is either used in the Jochkita or eaten right away. Sito isn't the only food that comes from the baitach. Baitach guide, or saguaro seeds, are also used by many people. To begin, the pulp and seeds left behind when you made the sito should be laid out in the sun. After a day or two, the pulp will have dried to a consistency of a damp sponge. Pounding the pulp will release and separate the seeds. The seeds can be sifted through a strainer to separate them from the remaining pulp. Don't worry if a small amount of pulp remains. It adds a sweetness to the seeds. Baitach gaij can now be lightly toasted over the stove or in an oven. Many people then grind the seeds and add them to an alto or stew as a nutritious thickener. The baitach harvest is critical to bring the rains to our dry desert. The monsoon storms bring water to the plants, animals, and the people of the desert. Without these rains and flash floods, Tanah Altan fields will not fill with water. Traditional crops such as tepri beans and the squash rely on these rains. Our relatives, the Hashan, brings us many gifts, baitach, sito, gaij, and even the rains that bring precious water to the desert.
That was just to kind of give you guys a better idea of all the things that I've been talking about. But now I just want to get into the Tanah Altan family, the family that has been here for generations. And this woman here, Anita Hill, if you've noticed at this corner by the double doors, there's an elder woman who's doing the processing. You see the pictures. This is actually her featured on the Arizona Highways magazine, and this was in 1983, I think. And now she has since then passed on. In 94, she passed on. And her granddaughter, who is also an elder herself today, in 2017, the summer, she was featured and has been featured on many online articles, newspapers, magazines herself, because not just Autumn, but the community really loves the story of this family that has been here for so long, and their resilience to continue on culture and identity, and their resistance as well. So it's just really cool to, meet this family and really get to know them. Now, Stella is the elder woman who was the granddaughter, and she tells a lot of really awesome stories. Being 5 years old, remembers being that young here in the park and harvesting. And Tanisha, who is her daughter, who's going to be that next one in line to carry it on. And they really do it more than just for themselves, but for the community, because it is a dying tradition, unfortunately. There are not many young people who are choosing to do this every summer and not willing to understand the importance of carrying this on. So it's folks like these, Autumn like these two, who I look up to, who mean so much to the community, because again, there's just not a lot of young people who are willing to carry on these same traditions. This is definitely a quote that I took from Camila Lopez, who was my cultural teacher. And it says that the autumn New Year is not a day but a season. And it is usually said in autumn that when people celebrate the wine feast, we have witnessed another year. And if we are lucky, we will see another year. We will greet one another again, and that is how the new year is marked. So this is a group photo of the harvest or the camp area. Sometimes during the summertime, we do get a lot of young groups that do come out and participate. So this is a nice photo that I was able to capture. And this is the end of the presentation. This is pretty much what the saguaro, the fruit, looks like after you scoop it up into a bucket. But if anyone has any questions or comments, we'll have it open. You get to eat it for dinner? Cool. Does anybody else